Okay, so this is chapter 4 of the Google SRE Handbook Workbook. And in this chapter, they continue to discuss the monitoring metrics and other things. We won't go through it extremely deeply. I just skim through it. Basically, I think everyone in the industry already today, this book, maybe it was written a couple of years ago, but today this is like pretty non-standard, pretty much applied by many companies. There are some good points here, some best practices, some things when you ask yourself whether I should go this way or that way that they point out. And I tend to agree with them also from experience. For example, they discussed whether the monitoring should be a separate service per team, like separate Grafana per team, separate Prometheus per team, or some shared service that you use, and they prefer the shared service and shared infrastructure because then you can also do some self-discovery and you don't need to know the whole. So this is the best practice that they recommend, to go with the shared service and not with the separate services, because then it's becoming more complex to discover things. I super agree with it, right? So this was one aspect of it. Other aspects of it is in general the separation that they do from alerts to monitoring and to logging. In general, they prefer to use the logging. They prefer to use metrics in order to do alerts and not go into scanning some log files in order to do the alerts. Also, they emphasize, of course, the freshness of the data. If you look at non-fresh data, you might come to incorrect conclusions. Pretty trivial, but good to remember. It's also good to have metrics that do like you report a minimum number of metrics like counters, and then you do calculations on these counters, and then you can deduce multiple values. So you can deduce the 50th percentile, 95th percentile, 99th percentile, versus if you have reported the output and you did not do output calculation. This goes along with the idea of deferring the calculation, and reporting as you can report that. Of course, this means more data to report, but deferring the calculation, deferring what the decisions you do almost always pays off, especially in data realms. Also, they also some additional things that they discussed is it's true that you can do monitoring based on logs. So you can have, let's say you have log lines with HTTP status, right? And you can put an alert on an error, but if you put an alert on an error on log and you want then to investigate what exactly happened, you need to go to the actual log lines and find it. So they always specify, and again, I agree with them that it's always based to report metrics and do the alerting based on metrics and not based on logs. And they give some example of reporting metrics with a label of the status, so that they have the request total, and then there is a label of the status of the HTTP request. So basically, they prefer simple metrics. I repeat this and they repeat this over and over again, but we all see this happen. People are creating complex alerts. You should prefer always to do the reporting first. Step one, it's like step one, report the metric. Step two, monitor the metric. Graph if you need to. If you can create the graph ad hoc quickly, you don't have to do this step. Step three, if you need, then do the alert. And then you have an infrastructure, a standard way to define all the alerts, not going to logs and not going to complex items, right? So the general idea is report the metric, track them, alert if needed, based on computation and deferring the data. Another item that they specify here in Chapter 4 is that it's better to treat the monitoring configuration as code. So this is not always a must, I would say. It really depends on your system. Sometimes it's pretty convenient, I must admit. It's pretty convenient to define alerts and monitoring based on user interface. I've been in some places where we moved from defining alerts and metrics and reporting in UI to code. And frankly, it felt the same. I mean, it's true that defining things in UI is you have less tracking of it, less version control. And as much as I'm a fan of version control and tracking, I'm not sure that working a couple of years with this, working a couple of years with this, which one was better? Obviously, I mean, I cannot argue with you if you say that code as infrastructure always wins. But how much complexity do you pay for it? In any way, Google advocates for code as metrics. You know, for a company like Google, this makes a lot of sense. For other companies, not sure which way could be beneficial. It's also good here they emphasize that they use a single shared like service, common approach over time. Centralized dashboarding allow people to discover, to access, even if you just want to see what other teams are doing, which dashboards do they have. You go to this shared monitoring web interface and you see it in actual workings. And here they continue by discussing which metrics should you track, like versions of a binary. So I actually used it. I mean, when I have a deployment, I want to see like a line on the graph or something happens so that I can correlate upgrades of the software with errors, right? So this can be beneficial. Upgrades of configuration. If you are updating configuration, I would love to see this in a chart such that I know here a configuration was updated, here it was updated, and then correlate it to errors. Always when I say we need a chart, I don't really mean that we need to create the actual panel. I just mean that we need to have it available in case we need it. For configuration and binary upgrades, I would also want to see actually the chart. And here they describe that also in Java, we want to track some language-specific metrics such as the metaspace size and the heap size, the status of the served traffic. We already discussed it with the status codes. And whether we should test other logic. It's a logic after all. So in Google, they have some injection of the time series data such that they can test it. They also discuss how much complex this may be, you know, because when you have a metric, it may not fire any alert. You may not be able to see it anytime until 3 years when the error happens. So it might be a good use case to dump like the main metrics just to see from time to time and get some report, even in mail, of what's happening in the system. So the conclusion is that we want to base our metrics based on actual metrics, counters, not logs, right? We want to report them. We want to have status codes as labels. We want to have a centralized repository and so on. So this was chapter 4 of the Google SRE workbook. I don't think I was overblown by it, but it does give you some order into what's happening, what's the best practice. Nothing dramatic, but it's a good alignment of the thought.